It was an ordinary evening. I came home a little earlier than usual. The silence in the apartment seemed even pleasant after a long day at work. I went into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of coffee, and sat down on the couch, taking my time. From there, I accidentally heard her voice. She was on the phone in the next room. I was not in the habit of eavesdropping, but something in her tone made me freeze. Her voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but every word hit me like a knife to the heart. A little more and he will pay off the last debt. He doesn't even realize what an idiot he is. As soon as everything is paid, I will file for divorce. I don't need him anymore. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. I felt something cold squeezing my chest. It was hard for me to breathe. I could not believe what I had just heard. It was my wife's voice. The woman for whom I worked 12 hours a day. The woman for whom I took on all her debts, helped her get out of a financial hole when her business went bankrupt. A woman I loved more than my life. I sat in the darkness and just listened. Her tone was indifferent, cold, as if I had always been just a means to an end for her. There was only one question in my mind: was it all a lie? My thoughts took me back. I remembered how we met 5 years ago. She was strong, ambitious, but even then she was struggling with financial difficulties. Her business was not profitable, her debts were piling up, and her creditors were pressuring her from all sides. I fell in love with her at first sight and promised myself that I would do everything I could to make sure she never felt fear and hopelessness again. I sold my car to help her pay off her first debt. Then I took out a loan to save her apartment from being confiscated. I believed that together we would get through this. I worked day and night to gradually close all her financial obligations. She always looked grateful. She hugged me, thanked me for my support, and said that I was her rock. I did not notice how her smile hid indifference. At that moment, I wanted to burst into the room and scream, "Why? Why did she do this to me? Why, when I had given her everything I had?" But I didn't. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and forced myself to calm down. I realized that emotions were my biggest enemy right now. She must not know what I heard. If she sees me as a fool who will helplessly pay off her debts and be left with nothing, I will let her believe it. For now. I still had a few more payments to make to completely close her debts. I could have stopped now. But no. I decided to act smarter. I pretended that nothing had happened. I continued to be an attentive and caring husband. But something broke inside me. The next morning I went to a lawyer. The first step was to sign over the entire business and the apartment I had saved to my name. She didn't even notice when she signed the documents. I told her it was a formality for the bank. Then I closed her last loan and pretended that it was a joy for me. Finally, we are free of debt. She didn't even realize that I had already developed a plan to leave her empty-handed. She continued to play the role of a loving wife, but now I saw something I hadn't noticed before. Her eyes became colder, her smile strained. She no longer put emotion into our conversations. In her eyes, I was just a resource that had fulfilled its mission. I learned to keep quiet and watch. And every fake gesture she made only strengthened my resolve. I decided not to ruin her game right away. No screaming, no scandals, no tears. I just let her believe that she had outsmarted me. I let her think that I was still the fool who didn't suspect anything. She didn't know that I had transferred our entire joint account to another one long ago. She did not know that the apartment where we lived no longer belonged to her. She didn't know that I had recorded every call and conversation she made for the court. I gave her time to dig her own hole. That night when I heard her words, I thought it would be the end for me. But in fact, it was the beginning. I no longer felt like a victim. I felt my strength awakening. She herself gave me a weapon, her words. And I was going to use them against her. She still believed that I was the same naive man who was ready to throw the whole world at her feet. I learned to control my emotions perfectly, hiding my anger and pain behind a mask of care. It was difficult. Especially when she hugged me in the evening and whispered about our happy future, although there was no love or warmth in her eyes anymore. She thought she had everything under control. She didn't know that her perfect plan was coming apart at the seams. The very next morning I went to see a lawyer recommended by an old friend of mine. He was a quiet, calm man who had seen hundreds of such cases and knew how to act without making too much noise. You have to understand that if she decides to use you, you have to act coldly and without emotion, he said, looking me in the eye. I'm ready, I replied without hesitation. We developed a clear plan. First, sign over all property and accounts to my name. Second, transfer the money from our joint account to another account where she has no access. Third, gather evidence of her manipulations so that at the divorce court it would look like she destroyed our marriage. I started acting gradually so that she would not suspect anything. The first step was the apartment I had once saved from confiscation. I told her that the bank required updated documents to confirm solvency. She didn't even look at the papers when she signed them. In her eyes, I was the fool who still blindly believed in our love. The next step was my business, which I had started before our marriage. I transferred it to a trustee so that she could not claim a share in the divorce. And the most important thing was the bank accounts. I created a separate account and gradually transferred all our savings there. She didn't notice anything because I was in charge of finances. It was convenient for her that I was controlling everything while she was preparing for her big escape. I started recording our conversations. Every sarcastic comment she made, every hint of my naivety, every mention of her plans for life without me. I also hired a private detective who gathered information about her meetings with friends, where she openly admitted that she was just waiting for the moment to leave. She didn't suspect anything. I continued to play the role of a loving husband. I gave her flowers, took her out to dinner, talked about our common dreams. She laughed in my face, not even realizing that I had already trapped her. I watched as she happily made plans for the future, thinking that after the divorce she would get half of everything I earned. But she didn't even realize that she had already lost everything. One day I accidentally mentioned that I had finally paid off her last debt. Her eyes lit up, I could see it. She thought that now all that was left was to file for divorce and get half of my property. But she didn't know that at that moment all our joint accounts were empty. All the assets had already been transferred to my name. I didn't make any scandals. I didn't throw accusations. I just watched her. She began to notice that something had changed. "You've been acting strange lately," she said one night at dinner. "Just tired?" "It's all for us, for our future," I replied, barely holding back an ironic smile. Her confidence in her own victory kept her in an illusion. I decided to give her some time. Let her take the first step. Let her file for divorce, thinking she would win. And I just sat there and watched her sink deeper and deeper into her lies. I no longer felt any pain. Only cold calm and a desire to see the moment when her perfect plan would collapse right before her eyes. She thought she had a victory in her hands. Her debts were completely closed. Thanks to me. I saw her mood change. She became lighter, more cheerful, as if she had finally freed herself from the burden that I was carrying. But there was something else behind this feigned tenderness. She started staying late after work, making up meetings with her friends, and sometimes even disappearing for several hours without answering her phone. I already knew where she was going. My detective found out that she rented an apartment in another neighborhood. A small but cozy place where she planned to move when she finally got rid of me. She was also consulting with a lawyer, discussing how to divide my property and get half of everything I had earned during our marriage. She thought I was still unsuspecting. I closed her last loan. At that moment, she was already packing her things and choosing the day she would file for divorce. I watched her in silence. She didn't even hide her satisfaction. In her eyes, I was a fool who didn't understand anything. But she did not know the main thing. I had already prepared my move. While she was secretly meeting with her lawyer, I also filed documents. But not for divorce. It was an application for the division of property, which was based on the fact that I had paid all her debts and financially supported her all these years. All the documents for the real estate and business had already been transferred to me. Our joint accounts were empty. All the funds were in my personal account, to which she had no access. The only thing left to her was the debt obligations that I officially gave to her in exchange for an amicable divorce. When she found out that I was ahead of her, she turned pale. "What does this mean?" she barely said, holding the documents in her hands. "It means that you are now free. Just like you wanted," I replied calmly. Her plan fell apart right before her eyes. She was left with nothing. I signed the documents, leaving her with only an empty account and a pile of financial obligations that she planned to dump on me. She tried to scream to accuse me of cruelty, but it didn't matter anymore. I no longer felt pain. Only cold satisfaction. I had been waiting for this moment for weeks. Everything, the silence, the acting like a loving husband, the naivety I tried to demonstrate, the nights without sleep, the constant struggle with the rage that burned inside me all led to this moment. The moment when I could watch her lose everything she considered hers. And I had no doubt that this day would come. When she saw that all the accounts were blocked and the property had long been transferred to me, her eyes filled with panic. She was nervously rushing around the apartment, trying to call the bank, checking the cards, entering their numbers over and over again, hoping that it was just some kind of mistake. But the answer was always the same: she no longer existed in the system. No accounts, no finances that had been under her control until recently. And I watched this with cold indifference. Not the slightest intention to help or even sympathize. It was her struggle, her choice, and now she had to take responsibility for it. She quickly realized that this was not just a temporary problem. Her face began to change, her silent bewilderment turning into despair. She rushed to me, hoping that at least I could help her out. There was only one question in her eyes: why? Why did this happen? I had once again become the man she longed for when she thought I would remain helpless and easy to manipulate. Now I was not her husband, I was just an obstacle that deprived her of everything. I responded without emotion. Sometimes people can't understand the truth until they see it in person. I let her know that I knew about her plan. About all her manipulations, about her idea to leave as soon as I fulfilled my part of the bargain, to pay off all her debts and remain trapped in her false kindness. I felt only cold confidence in my actions. Her face was distorted with fear. She began to make excuses, trying to turn the situation in her favor. She begged me to give her a chance, assuring me that it was just a mistake, that she was doing it all out of love for me, that she never wanted to do this. But I no longer believed her words. I couldn't be fooled anymore. I remembered everything. I remembered the nights when I worked 2 jobs to help her pay off her debts, when I denied myself everything just to make her happy. And what did I get for it? Only her desire to leave as soon as her financial situation improves. Only empty promises and hidden plans. She wanted to leave me with nothing, and she would have done so if I hadn't been ready to respond to her manipulations. Now the roles are reversed. She was left with nothing. No money, no apartment, no future. She no longer had anything she could steal from me. I had taken everything she had planned to take for herself. And she knew it. She just couldn't believe it. She fell to the floor, screaming with powerlessness. And at that moment, I felt my heart remain cold as a stone. There was neither joy nor anger, only peace. I knew it was the right thing to do. I just turned away and left. I didn't come back, I didn't look at her. I left her alone with the ruins she had built herself. It was not revenge. It was justice. She was standing on the threshold of our home, once so cozy, where I could still believe in our future. We had lived together all these years, but today this space was alien to her. I watched her gather her things, trying to look calm, although her eyes betrayed fear and confusion. She was carrying a few bags, no more than that. I had already taken everything else that was left. This was my home, my property, and now she was leaving empty-handed, leaving behind everything she wanted to be hers. Just as she had come into my life once before, empty, without anything. She tried to talk to me, looking for at least a little sympathy in my eyes, trying to get back at least a small piece of the power she once had over me. But I no longer believed her words. They were empty, like everything else she had said during our life together. The same words that I had once been willing to accept because I was blind with love and naivety. And now I knew that she had lost that power at the moment when, by dismissively calling me a fool, she was sure that I would never know the truth. Now, as she walked away, leaving me behind, she probably hoped that something else could be fixed, that she could pretend to be a victim and get sympathy from others. And indeed, after she left, her new game began, a game of lies and manipulation. She told friends, relatives, and acquaintances that I had gone crazy, that I had become overly jealous and unpredictable. She tried to portray me as a reckless person who did all this because of his own complexes and fear of losing her. And while a few people may have believed her, others knew who I really was. With every new word that came from her supporters, the truth became more and more obvious to those who knew us. Everyone knew how much I had done for her, how much time and effort I had spent to get her out of debt, denying myself everything for her comfort. And it was not just a sense of truth, it was a sense of justice. Everyone saw who I really am and who she was. And all she could do was lie and try to make herself look like a victim. The rumors spread quickly. They left no chance. People were talking, and her mask was cracking, and there she was, standing in front of everyone as she really was. Not strong, not independent, not smart. Just lonely and a disgrace. Her face, which had once been a mask of a confident woman, could now hide nothing. She, who had always tried to look perfect, was now lost. And there was a certain catharsis in this because everything turned out as it was supposed to. And I felt calm. No, it was not joy or traditional triumph. It was something much more important. It was the cold satisfaction that justice, albeit late, had finally been done. I had no desire for revenge. I did not seek to see her suffer. I just let her see the consequences of her own decisions. It was her game, her choice, and she got what she had prepared for herself. She left, leaving an emptiness behind. No support, no future. She was left alone, with no one, nothing, without any chance of ever being able to return to this life. And at that very moment, I felt myself regaining my dignity. I was left with something she could never take away, my freedom. And this freedom was mine to control. I started a new life as if nothing had happened. Next to me were only empty walls, empty rooms that no longer reminded me of what had once happened. The house that had once been home to the two of us now looked like a stranger. All those years we had lived together, all the effort I had put in, it was all just part of my old reality. Now I was alone, and with each new day I felt this new beginning giving me strength. All that remained of the old chapter were just memories that were gradually melting away, becoming less painful. I got rid of material ties, those burdensome things that connected me to the past. All those debts, real estate, bank accounts, everything was rewritten, and nothing kept me in that life anymore. All those weeks of silence that I endured became a solid foundation for finally breaking out of the trap it had set for me. I did not look back, did not look for her, and did not wait for her to change her plans. I decided that I would no longer allow myself to be a part of it. She probably thought she would find someone who could support her in this difficult period. Someone who would take her in, give her shelter. But everyone she turned to turned away. Everyone saw her true face. Everyone realized who she was. This was the same woman who, having gotten what she needed, was no longer afraid to manipulate and abandon those who became superfluous to her. All her attempts to find shelter with friends and relatives failed. They didn't support her because they found the strength to see the truth about her. Her manipulations no longer worked. And I was happy that she was left alone with the results of her actions. The silence in my life spoke more than any words could. I felt no need for revenge. It was not revenge. It was the restoration of justice that I had long been due. She had brought herself to this state. It was her responsibility, and now she had to face the consequences of her choices. And if her life no longer had anything to keep her afloat, that was her own business. I had no desire to continue any ties with the past. All those emotions that I hadn't been able to express before remained outside my words. I was not looking for an opportunity to tell her how I felt. I didn't want to be a part of this drama anymore. The silence I left after she left was my response to everything that had happened. This peace was my triumph. Now I had only freedom. Freedom from her manipulations, from her deception, from her betrayals. Sometimes the best revenge is silence and freedom. I believed in this now more than ever before. I was free. Free from toxic relationships and from the person who was trying to break me. I found an inner peace that I hadn't felt in years. And all these feelings, this new silence inside, became more important to me than any words or accusations. It was my victory. And it was absolute because it required nothing but my dignity.